Hello and welcome back to my channel. We have been blessed with a new season of The Crown to indulge in this November, and I'm going to take great delight in reviewing the first 2 episodes and also just giving a bit of give my own views and assessment of the characters and the actors that are playing the characters in The Crown. Season 5. It's been so eagerly anticipated because it will feature the breakdown of, well, the Charles-Diana scenario, the marriage, and also like the ancillary items going on as well. I love that season 5 opened with Claire Foy. I think, do you know what? I think the producers know the affection that the fans have for Claire Foy, and bringing her back for episode 1, like, I honestly, it made my heart so happy to see her walking onto Britannia. But I love what they did because they got the Britannia, which at the time, I think it was 1946, it said on screen, and it was to be a symbol of hope and prosperity for the times ahead. It would be a magnificent ship that would weather any storm. And I mean, it really was, I'm sure you got this, it was the symbolic of the monarchy, the royal family, how it was meant to be held as an institution that could weather any storm. And then fast forward to 1991 and the ship is in complete, it looks good from the outside, but as soon as you look under the bonnet, again, car metaphor, shouldn't be using that, but as soon as you go and look at the internal system, it is falling apart to the point where they're considering whether to just get rid of it altogether. And that is really where the royal family were at that point in time. We see the Queen like fighting to keep the Britannia because it is her most beloved home, the one that she has curated, and she mentioned that all the other houses had been bequeathed to her. Honestly, like, I just thought it was a very, very good metaphor and really sets up the season. And also the use of maritime, the storms ahead, I just thought it was very, very appropriate. You also have beautiful little 5-year-old Leonora with cancer that they're not sure if it's terminal, but to any viewer, you know that this is a tragedy about to happen, and sure enough, it does happen. And it starts the season with tragedy and so much atmosphere and turbulence. Honestly, it's like it explodes. In saying that, I think the first episode was really setting the scene. I don't think, like, you had to look at it very carefully. As in, I don't think a huge amount happened in the first episode. And I sort of was left at the end of the first episode going, I only have 10 episodes this season, and yet not that much happened in the first episode. I don't know, did you use that time wisely? I mean, that was just the impression I was left after it. But in saying that, it reintroduced you to the different situations and the relationships. You've got Prince Philip, who is absolutely adoring over the Queen and how supportive they have been to each other, and their marriage then is juxtaposed so starkly against the other marriages of the royal children. I mean, you've got the fake second honeymoon that was set up basically by the press to try and make the public happy that their most beloved couple were in a really happy, good place. And you feel the pain coming from those involved. You feel the pain from Diana, who is not loved by her husband. You feel the pain that Charles is going through, who is clearly in love with another woman and just has absolutely nothing in common with Diana, and yet putting on this facade. Then you feel like the children that are trying to stick up for their mummy in various situations, like when she said she wanted to go shopping and nobody else was stood up for her, and then little Harry put up his hand. Like, honestly, it just made me, it was so beautiful. We also see an impetulant Charles who is buoyed by the public poll that more than half of the UK public think that the Queen should abdicate and give the throne to Charles. Now, this was obviously at the point where it wasn't really known about what Diana was feeling, how she was doing. It was a public facade about their marriage. I think this is going to be a really interesting potential fall from grace for Charles in this season, as he starts out with his popularity so high in comparison to the Queen. And obviously we'll have to see how the series develops, but we all know the story of what is coming. We also see a bit of a side of the Queen that is a bit ugly, and in terms of she wants the government to pay for the renovations to Britannia, that she asks for so little, and that she expects that when she does ask for something that it isn't even questioned. John Major is really, really new. It has taken over Thatcher's government at a time of recession and this crisis, and we all know about a cost of living crisis. We're living in one now, and I can just imagine the public reaction if it was found out now that so much, I think it was like 14 million back then, but obviously factor in inflation, if so much was required to restore something like the Britannia now. And it wasn't the Queen's finest moment, I'll be honest. Wasn't really too impressed with that situation personally. Now, whether that's true or not, but Imelda Staunton brought out a side of the Queen that is potentially something that is less appealing to people. And I want to touch on the actors because I really like how this has been cast. Let's start with Imelda Staunton. I think she's a very, very good Queen. She's a very good portrayal. I feel like she captures, I think physically it's a good match. I think stature wise, a very good match. I think she's really embodied the mannerisms, the way the Queen held herself. Now we're referring to, this is the first season where the Queen has passed on, and so it's really interesting for me to refer to the Queen in the past tense. But I think that Imelda Staunton is doing a really, really good job, and also showing the internal conflict and the just many different facets and the humanity of the Queen. And I feel like that's something that definitely then contrasts with the whole divine aspect, that the Queen is meant to be divine and has deity, God-like, is defender of the faith, and yet she's revealing that she's fallible in this series, and it's really, really interesting. I love Jonathan Pryce as Prince Philip. Again, I don't think it's an amazing physical match, but I think he brings like the different sides of Philip really well. And I think Philip is sort of like, at this stage of his life, he is tempering a bit, but then you see his trigger points as well. So I want to go back to the first episode again, and honestly, it's just really interesting because you've got John Major's perspective that, hang on a second, Charles is just so keen to accede to the throne, but his biggest asset is his wife, who's clearly being neglected. And that's the way they're portraying it. And it's really interesting that someone who only has a very minor insight into the life of the royal family is able to just call it so succinctly. I want to talk about Charles though, because this is really funny. So my other half, who's not really big into the crown, looked and said, who is that supposed to be? Now, I straight away was like, okay, interesting choice for Charles. Physically not a great match in my view, but I think he has definitely captured a side of Charles, and I actually don't mind that he doesn't look too much like Charles. I think, particularly given Charles just acceded the throne, it's no harm he doesn't look exactly like Charles. I think that might actually be in the real King Charles' favour. I think a lot of people know Dominic West from The Wire, and I actually really like the portrayal he's giving of Charles. I really enjoy watching it. I have no idea whether it's like what was going through the actual Charles's mind in those situations, but I like Dominic West. I think it's very congruous the way he presents Charles as flawed but also deeply unhappy. We have Charles saying that by his age, if he was in other areas of like commerce, that he could be at the absolute pinnacle of his powers, but he feels very trapped and missing potential. And that's just a really interesting thing to hear, and whether you agree with it or not, that's definitely what is being portrayed. People around him, they're sort of pandering to him, and I can see why, because he's going to be the king. Then you've got the ball at Balmoral, and I like that because it just gets, I love these ball settings because I love the splendor, the opulence of it, and you get to see everyone together, and you get to see, like, sort of from an outsider, we're sort of like John Major in that we're kind of seeing this event, this annual event, for the first time. I want to take a moment and talk about Elizabeth Debicki, who I just think is really good as Diana. I think she has captured her really well, particularly all the looks. She definitely brings maturity to the role. It's a more nuanced approach, which is befitting of Diana, who is not new to the system at all and has now understood what her life is and she's gone through the awful, the suicide attempts. She has gone through the bulimia, and she's sort of at a point where she's at her wit's end, but she knows that. She's aware that there's no real way out that doesn't involve major drama. And I really think you get that from Elizabeth. I really do think you get that from Elizabeth. You also have Anne. So Claudia Harrison is playing Princess Anne. She has the grit and the might that is synonymous with Princess Anne. The whole point of going to the lighthouse and looking is very symbolic, I think, going and looking at a looking point where you're supposed to be looking at trouble and everything coming ahead, and she's very much interested in her own happiness and going after Tim. And I think that thematically it sums up that a lot of the actions of the royal family, at least that's how it's portrayed, were very self-involved, and they weren't necessarily thinking of the actions or the combined actions in light of the institution of the monarchy. And maybe that's not a bad thing. But I just think that it was a very interesting moment, that the lighthouse, where you're supposed to look out for the ships and everything coming your way, almost like they are at the helm, and their focus is not on that, it's on what's going downstairs, quite literally. And I thought that was a really nice way to set it up. And I enjoy that. I enjoy these little moments, as you may have guessed already. Season 5, episode 1. All in all, it made me want more. It really made me want more, which is why we're going to talk about episode 2. Now, we start off that Philip has a new passion because he gave up polo. He sort of reached the age where it probably wasn't safe for him to be going around playing polo anymore. Don't know. Anyway, he's taken up carriage driving, and he sees the mother of Leonora, who brings Philip to Leonora's grave and speaks about her trouble and her marital. She gives the impression that all is not right in the marriage, basically, and that everything is taking a toll, which you can completely understand. And you see Philip being very kind, very helpful, very understanding, giving her 2 pieces of advice. The first one is to set up a charity in her sadly departed child's name, and also to find a passion, a love. And then they find this really old, rickety, basically declared unfit for use ever again carriage, and Philip takes it on, and with his connections, money, whatever you want to call it, restores it, and then brings Leonora's mother out on it. And you see her laughing, you see her smiling, and it's lovely to see that kindness in Philip. And he speaks about how he references again the sister's passing in the plane crash, and really the journey of grief. And I found that just really almost emotional, because so many people suffer with grief, and it is basically unfortunately we will all have to deal with grief in our life. And the way he describes it as making a home in your skin, it's so true. I really do think it's really true. But episode 2 also brings you straight in to the Diana and Charles situation, and we have Andrew Morton going through Diana's friend to try and get her to record tapes answering questions so that he can write a book with her side. And the way she's convinced is that he's saying, well, there's people who are close to Charles, there's going to be a book around that. Don't you want your side to be fairly represented, and I will fairly represent it? You won't be officially involved because I'll have never interviewed you. However, if you just talk about and record answering these questions and I have access to them. So I think it was very cleverly done, and I do think his motives are altruistic with Diana, even though it's very clear that he stands to be made very rich by this book. But you can't really hate a guy for wanting to transform his life, as long as it's not at the expense of others. Diana is, at this point, she's very shrewd. She knows full well the impact of this book could have on the monarchy, on the marriage. There's actually some sirens going off around me, and I thought, oh, I'll stop recording now. But actually, I think they're quite quite appropriate, because you're talking about Diana's suicide attempts, how difficult it was for her bulimia, the lack of support, the fact that she heard Charles speaking with Camilla and speaking in this adoring, loving voice, a voice that she just never heard. And, you just see the heartbreak there. And yeah, it's a very powerful, very moving. Well, I think Elizabeth and Becky did a really, really good job. Whatever views you have of Diana, I think Elizabeth does just a great job of bringing her take forward. It's funny then, you see Philip, Prince Philip, being so kind and giving everything to Leonora's mother, and then when he goes, because Leonora's mother's had told him, here there's a book, he goes and visits Diana. It's a very different Philip, because his institution and the institution of the woman that he adores, the Queen Elizabeth, is in question, and he knows the danger, and he tries to tell Diana that he has a fondness for her, but then you have to question, well, how has that been shown? How has this fondness meant anything or done anything over the years? And honestly, it's a really interesting end to the second episode. What I also liked about episode 2 of season 5 is thematically the hawk appearing over Prince Philip's head. And it really symbolizes that there's about to be an attack on his beloved institution. And I mean, he speaks at the start of the episode about his love, like his main love was for polo, and then he had to re-record it and say sporting love, which I think was quite interesting. But really, you can see his real love, at least, is for the institution and for Elizabeth. And he speaks about trying to find ways within a system to find happiness. And I think he had done that by that stage. I think he had been given just enough freedom. Obviously, he didn't have everything that he wanted to be happy, and is convinced then that if he can do it, that other people can do it. So these are the first 2 episodes. There are my views on it. Tell me what your views are as well. What did you think of the first 2 episodes? Were you happy with them? Did you think it was a fair portrayal of what you thought was going on? Let me know. Tune back in for my next review of The Crown Season 5. Take care, subscribe for more.